Hi, sweethearts. Today on Stories for Kids, I'm going to tell you the story of the 12 dancing princesses. Once upon a time, there was a king who had 12 beautiful daughters. But these princesses were unusual. See, every night the princesses would be locked in their tower, and every morning there would be a pair of worn-out dancing shoes at the foot of each princess's bed. No one, not even the king, could figure out how the princesses got out of their tower and danced all night. The princesses refused to answer their father's questions and tell him how they got out and danced. So the king sent a proclamation throughout the kingdom that whoever could figure out how the princesses got out and where they went to dance all night would marry a princess of their choice and become the next king. If they tried and failed, it was off with their heads. Many people tried, and many people failed to figure out how the princesses got out and where they went dancing every night. The king was getting desperate. Now one day, a man returning from war entered the city, where he came across an old woman selling trinkets in the marketplace. Now this old woman was actually a fairy. The soldier, whose name was Alexander, was handsome and kind and polite and very smart. She called him to her market stall, and when he approached, she said, "There is a task set for you by the fates. Go to the castle, because the king needs your help. It is said that his daughters are locked in their rooms every night, and yet when the morning comes, at the foot of each bed is a worn-out pair of dancing shoes. You, sir, must solve the mystery of the 12 dancing princesses. Take this cloak with you. It will shield you from the sight of man and beast. I must warn you, do not eat or drink anything that the princesses give you." She pushed a silver gray cloak into his hands and disappeared into thin air. Alexander entered the castle and spoke to the king. He was given the task of figuring out what was going on with the princesses. He was taken to the garden to meet the princesses. The oldest princess, Natasha, thought he was quite handsome, and he talked to her most that afternoon. At dinner, the princesses tried to serve him food and wine, but the old soldier remembered the wise words of the woman at the market and did not eat any of it. As the sun set, the princesses were taken to their rooms and locked in the tower. Alexander followed them and sat by the door. He remembered the cloak that the old woman had given him, so he took it from his bag and wrapped himself in it. Just as the clock struck midnight, the doors of the princesses' chambers opened, and they each came out of their rooms. Dressed in beautiful dresses and dancing shoes, they gathered in a circle. The eldest daughter performed a series of dance steps and then stomped her foot. The place she stomped on turned into a wooden trapdoor, and they each descended through the trapdoor and shut it behind them as soon as the door was shut, turned back into stone. Alexander spent the rest of the night trying to imitate the dance steps that summoned the trapdoor. Just before the sun rose in the morning, a trapdoor suddenly appeared in the floor not far from where Alexander had been practicing, and he pulled the cloak on just in time as the princesses came through the magic trapdoor. As they went to their rooms, the youngest princess thought she saw something move in the shadows, but she didn't say anything to her sisters. All the next day, Alexander talked to the princesses and tried to ask them questions to get them to tell him where they went every evening. But the 12 princesses didn't say a word about it. Again, at dinner, the princesses tried to serve him food and drink, but he refused to eat anything again. Once again, Alexander kept a close eye on the princesses and tried to pay better attention to the dance steps that opened the magic door. Unfortunately, he wasn't quite quick enough to slip through the trapdoor and follow the princesses, so he spent the rest of the night practicing the dance steps that Natasha had done, and he finally got them right. Before he could go through the trap door, another appeared in the floor, so he quickly shut the trap door he had just conjured and hid beneath his cloak. He laughed softly to himself, but stopped quickly when the youngest princess whipped her head around as though she had heard him. Again the next day he questioned the princesses, but none of them would tell him where they went. The third night, as he watched Natasha conjure the trapdoor, he followed closely behind the youngest princess and made it through the trapdoor. He followed her down the stairs to a vast underground lake. There were 4 gondolas with boatmen waiting for the princesses. Alexander recognized these boatmen as enemy spies of the kingdom. The 3 princesses climbed in each of the gondolas, and the boats were paddled toward the middle of the lake. The soldier was very quick, and he was able to sneak into the back of the last gondola. When they got to the middle of the lake, an island appeared, and the boatmen helped the princesses out of the gondolas and walked them into the island. They danced through the grove of trees that had beautiful silver leaves. After that, they passed through a meadow that was filled with flowers made of pure gold. Lastly, they came to an archway of trees that were covered in diamond flowers. Here, there were many fairies dressed for a masked ball. The princesses chose masks from a table, and the musicians began to play. The fairies and the princesses began to dance. Alexander took a mask off the table and started to dance. Eventually, he got to dance with the oldest princess, and they danced so beautifully together that all the other dancers left the floor and just watched them in wonder. As the song came to the end, a gong sounded, and the fairies began to disappear into little puffs of colored smoke. The princesses took their masks off, put them on the table, and began to hurry back the way they had come. Alexander put his mask in his pocket. As they passed through the diamond flower arch, Alexander took a flower and put it in his pocket. When they ran through the golden meadow, Alexander stopped and picked a golden flower and put it in his pocket as well. Following close behind the princesses, they dashed through the silver trees. Alexander stopped to tear a branch off the tree and put it in his pocket. The princesses and the boatmen were in such a hurry that they nearly left Alexander on the island. He didn't make it into the gondola, but he held on to the back of the last one. The youngest princess thought she saw a glimpse of the handsome man who had danced with her sister, but decided it was nothing. When they got back to the stairs, the boatmen helped the princesses out, and they began to sprint up the stairs, with Alexander hot on their heels. They got to the top of the stairs and went through the trapdoor quickly. The tower door opened just as the trapdoor disappeared into the floor. It was the king. "Where have you been?" shouted the king. And at that moment, Alexander took off his magic cloak and said, "It's quite an interesting story, my king. Let us go down to the breakfast room. I shall tell you the whole tale, from start to finish." The princesses were absolutely shocked, and the Princess Natasha looked like she was going to cry. They followed the soldier and the king to the breakfast room, and the soldier told the king how it had happened. Needless to say, the king was shocked and outraged. As Alexander told the king the story, he pulled the twig of silver leaves out of his pocket, and the golden flower, and the twig with diamond flowers on it, and the leaves, and last of all, the mask he had worn. The king sent his men to arrest the enemy spies. The fake boatmen were brought before the king. They did not lie about what they had done. In the end, the boatmen were thrown into the dungeons, and the princesses were punished for not telling their father the truth. Alexander, the soldier who had solved the riddle, chose the eldest princess to be his bride and courted her until she agreed to marry him. Over time, the other princesses met wonderful young men and got married. When the king died, King Alexander and Queen Natasha ruled the kingdom in peace and were very happy together. And that is the story of the 12 dancing princesses. Thank you for listening, sweethearts. This is it for Stories for Kids. Come back next week for my next story. Bye-bye.